materials are going to be free and available. And hopefully you'll see where you might be able to use this presentation in a lot of different ways at your institutions or even in other creative aspects. So, okay, you're seeing my screen. Let me just do one more check. Okay, so let me exit full screen here. All right. So I was the PD or PI for this project. It's a USDA NIFA funded project that ended in 2025. And here are some of the other folks that helped bring this project to life. I do want to share that I did present this at the Northeast Center to Advance Food Safety in January 2025, but I thought it was such a niche group of smaller growers and folks only in the Northeast that this was a great opportunity to kind of share the information to a larger audience. So I'll be talking about our produce trainer. And so again, this project was through a lot of expertise and help. We had folks from the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, TAG, New Mexico State University, Learning Games Lab, and a lot of other helpful interns that came through the door throughout this time period. And then a special thanks to Deanna, who passed, but was someone from Maryland Department of Ag that really supported worker food safety education and training. So let's see, University of Maryland's AA statement and our Justice for All civil rights posters as well. So to give you an idea of the presentation, I'll go through some of the background information to get an idea of the scope of why we went after grant funding for these materials, um, my thought process, as well as the teams for making the decisions that we did for creating outreach and educational materials, the aspiration that I wanted our outreach and education materials to have, and some of the methods and processes. So the fun stuff is more towards the end for sure. But to give you an idea, if you're not too familiar with the burden to foodborne illness, the CDC back in 2024 did update some of the numbers. So as we can see here that foodborne illness is something that does affect people in the United States. And some of the highlights in terms of pathogens are Salmonella, Campylobacter, invasive Listeria, norovirus, and if you're coming from a farming background, you're also thinking of E. coli as well. When we do look at the produce attribution to foodborne illness by certain pathogens from a wide data set from 1998 to 2022, because that was what was available at the time. If we start in the upper left-hand corner with E. coli 0157, we see that in green, it's looking at vegetables and row crops, and the percent of foodborne attribution is higher up compared to beef, dairy, pork, and fruit, to give you some examples. If we look at salmonella, again, we have our looking at our fresh produce for fruit in purple and our seeded vegetables in a lighter green and other produce in a neon green circled in red. We see that salmonella and the percentage of foodborne attribution during this time frame is a lot higher compared to other farm products such as beef, turkey, eggs, fish. Similarly, we see that Listeria, which has a higher death rate compared to other foodborne illnesses. It's going to be higher for vegetables and row crops and other produce compared to pork, eggs, fish, and chicken. So you can really dive into the literature as to why we're seeing higher attribution of E. coli, Listeria, and Salmonella related to vegetables, fruit, and other produce compared to your proteins. That's another topic, but still we're seeing a case being made that produce has some sort of concern with foodborne illness. So in Maryland, we do know that for our farming group, it's a very diverse workforce in the sense that we have urban, rural farmers, and even for the demographics. We're also seeing legislation that passed in Maryland a couple of years ago to help increase the definition of what farming is in Prince George's County. So our goal, based on the literature, was that we started to think that those who are training farm workers, especially the supervisors, may not know what they don't know, right? You don't know until something goes wrong and you're like, oh, I learned something new, learning opportunities. And what we were starting to think based on our on-farm readiness reviews in Maryland, as well as data shared throughout the Northeast during the Northeast Center for Advancing Food Safety annual meetings, was that topics around post-harvest sanitation, health and hygiene from workers, and pre-harvest worker training was kind of missing the mark, right? It's under the 50% for what regulators were seeing in this region. So how can we make this better so these numbers are higher? So we applied for a USDA NIFA AFRI grant under the food safety outreach program, and we were successful in 2021. And our title is TRAIN, Targeted Resources Addressing Identified Needs in Maryland, Worker Food Safety Training via On-Farm Piloting of a Mixed Media Toolkit. And again, to keep it short, we called it TRAIN. And our problem was to help provide a solution for small and medium-sized farms that are growing, harvesting, packing, and holding covered produce under the FDA's Food Safety Modernization Act produce safety rule to help with specific worker training. So again, you're improving your worker culture for food safety. You're also hopefully building a food culture on the farm that will help retain your workers as well. And all of these things put together will hopefully lead to an improved, safe, and nutritious food supply chain. Because again, we do have a pretty secure one, but again, there's areas where we can improve our behaviors. So our approach was through 4 objectives. The first one was to bring folks to the table in Maryland. And so that included University of Maryland College Park, University of Maryland Extension, University of Maryland Eastern Shore, and our state Department of Agriculture. So some of the things that we did as a team was listen to what farmers were saying, look into the literature, and we created a needs assessment to understand what were the barriers, knowledge, and farming demographics of farmers in Maryland. From there, that would help us identify what areas in worker training we needed to address. And our outputs were to create a supervisor manual to help them train their workers because they might not have a skill set of training other people, especially when you're thinking multi-generational farm families where maybe having an education background is helpful or just having something to go off of for your workers could be beneficial. The other item that we wanted to create was a worker toolkit, so educational modules for your farm workers. And we were aiming to make both the supervisor manual and the toolkit itself something that you could access in person as well as online, because in Maryland we do have a plain population. So again, our idea was to test the toolkit in situ and get some evaluation back, as well as disseminate our project learnings and deliverables both locally and nationally. So in terms of making our informed decisions, back in 22, we created that needs assessment survey. We presented it at the International Association for Food Protection in 2023, or IAFP. And so for the survey method, we were looking at evaluating farm owners or supervisors versus farm workers. And so the survey was administered online. It was about 10 minutes, so it was fairly lengthy, and we did have a modest incentive at that time. The inclusion criteria was that you worked on the farm in Maryland in 2021, you were a farm that grew fruits and vegetables to hopefully fall under that covered produce piece. And then we wanted to make sure that folks were able to identify as an owner, supervisor, and a worker, whether you were full-time or part-time, seasonal, or a volunteer. You had to be 18 years of older and read English. So some of the survey results, just to share, we had 37 respondents complete the survey. So again, it was very lengthy. Uh, we also had 31 respondents who said that they were full-time owners, and we found that most of these farms were selling to CSAs and at farmers markets. So again, that was a good piece of information just to have to know who the end buyer was. So just to highlight some of the barriers that we found with current material for worker food safety education was that a lot of owners and co-owners felt that they weren't specific to the farm activities that they were doing. They also felt it was too long. We also wanted to see how COVID might have affected training. And so again, owners were saying that farm worker training was taking too long since COVID. No one mentioned anything about language needs and not having space to train workers. So, if we could help provide resources for training, what would they like to see? So, again, for this one, people wanted hands-on resources, teaching kits. So, that was really exciting for us to see. Videos, something that were interactive, facilitated discussion question sheets. So, again, they also asked for videos that were not interactive, signs, printed materials that they could put as well. So to see what we could provide and seeing the gamut wasn't too surprising. So it was a good challenge for us to make sure we could tick all those boxes to make as many people happy. So when we looked at owners and non-owners and preference in education methods, again, the darker brown is learning new information, and the lighter brown are reminders of old information. Because again, we were curious, how do people want to learn new information versus just being reminded? It could be different. And we did see this. So for here, people wanted hands-on activities that would help them gain that knowledge and muscle memory for learning new information. We also saw that anything that was printed or image or pictures was going to be more helpful as a reminder of old information. Because again, if you're thinking about farm worker training with PSR, you do need to conduct annual worker trainings. So some of that could be old information for folks that have been at your farm for decades. And when we looked at owner response of barriers between training and adopting food safety practices, because we know with consumer food safety education, knowledge doesn't always translate to actual behavior change. We saw that owners said barriers were time, funding, appropriate training materials as some of the extreme barriers for them. So again, how do we make a slew of different training materials, as well as being cognizant of time and funding resources? For the knowledge check, we asked questions that were related to the produce safety rule. So we coded it correct or incorrect responses. And so just to highlight a couple of them here, we wanted to know about scouting for animal intrusion during harvest and harvesting safely. And we saw that non-owners, so our workers, were getting that correct a little bit more than owners. Nothing really significant statistically, but was interesting to see. When we asked about drought cover produce decisions during harvest, we saw that more owners got that correct compared to their workers. So again, drought covered produce could be something like an apple. Apples grow in a tree. And so when that apple falls to the ground, your workers should be trained not to pick the fallen apples off the ground and putting it in their bags to go to the public, because there could be bruising, there could be small cuts that allow bacteria to come up into the fruit and become a food safety issue. So again, we saw that owners had a better understanding of the concept around not picking up drop covered produce. Lastly, cleaning and sanitizing of food contact surfaces. So that's anywhere produce is touching a surface. It could be a conveyor belt, it could be a harvest bin. And we know that cleaning and sanitizing are two different steps. A lot of people across the food supply chain think cleaning and sanitizing are the same thing, but they're not. You have to clean before you sanitize. And we didn't see a difference between owners and workers getting that question correct. So that was a topic that we wanted to address. And all these were consistent with other literature and other presentations that we've seen over the years. So what does the toolkit look like? That was the next step. So with the help with our collaborators at New Mexico State University Learning Game Lab, we started to flesh out what could we create based on our budget from the grants. So we wanted to make it interactive. So the first part was how do you assess and manage risk? Because assessing risk is really a skill set. Doesn't matter if it's at the farm or in your own personal life, right? What is your risk tolerance? Our second lesson we wanted to do was around building your own standard operating procedures or SOPs. Again, they're supposed to be easy directions towards cleaning and sanitizing or other farm tasks. So how do you build that into a program? We also wanted to do an error-based learning, right? Should you do this or should you do that? And then again, when I teach food safety, especially at the consumer level, I think it's really like that I spy game. You're looking for things that could potentially go wrong and how to mitigate or hopefully eliminate that risk or hazard completely. So some sort of I spy game. And then we also talked about fake poop because again, we know bacteria is in feces. And is there something that we could do in this area with fake poop? So from there, our next step was to see what's going on, right? Are we going to be creating something that already exists? Is there a space for us to be nimble and create something that we think would have good broad implications? So some of the areas that we looked at were reading publications. We listened to different academia and federal partners talk during various PowerPoint presentations at conferences and webinars like this. We also asked questions to the different farm groups that we had access to throughout the year. So again, from the Produce Safety Alliance, from a previous presentation, they talked about guiding principles. And when you are developing materials, right, be clear and concise, test your messaging, right? Do we know our audience to know that the products we're creating is going to be something that they'll say, yeah, that's cool, we'll use it. Or are they just going to say, no, thanks, and your work gets dusty on the shelf somewhere? Where? Again, we looked at a lot of different publications. And another key piece too was using NECAFF annual meetings as a sounding board. So what does that mean? Throughout the agenda over the 2 days, there might be a space where I ask a question that I think our project is inching towards and just get feedback. Is it like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, or no, I don't think that might work. And if it's yes or no, maybe I can follow up with that person and just get more understanding from their perspective to help improve what we're trying to create. So again, these were some of the literature that helped us move our project from needs assessment to educational materials. Some of it is from past experience, and then some of it, again, is looking at some of those best practices from other academics and researchers. And so, again, from Dr. Ellen Evans, it's talking about chemotherapy patients, but it's a really great publication for how they looked at creating outreach and educational materials. And there were nuggets in there that I thought that we could use for our product development. So aspirations. We all want to create something that everyone's going to love. And sometimes, or a lot of times, it won't hit the mark for everyone. But if you've seen this image before, we know it's the four core from USDA, and it's really focused at food safety education for consumers. You want to clean hands and surfaces often. You want to separate raw proteins from vegetables so you're not cross-contaminating germs. Um, Step three is cooking. So are foods being cooked or reheated to the safe minimal temperature? And step four, chilling to make sure you don't allow for bacterial growth because you have a higher temperature above 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So these images, the four core, we've seen it with USDA, we've seen it with the Partnership for Food Safety Education for, oh gosh, I think closer to 30 years now. So they're icons in the realm of consumer food safety education. We've also seen images from FDA and CDC because this is a shared message. It's colorful, it's recognizable. And so in my head, how do we create materials that have this lasting impression that people can clearly associate our food safety materials for years to come? Maybe some of you have seen this little bacteria, Fight Back. So, Fight Back is from the Partnership for Food Safety Education. They've been around for over 25 years. And even this little green guy can help youth start thinking about food safety. For us in the consumer food safety education world, we're very familiar with BACK, Fight Back, and the partnership. So again, these lasting icons that people associate with food safety education. So this guy, Thermi, USDA created him in 2005. He's been updated, oh, sorry, 2003. He's been updated over time as part of the Is It Done Yet campaign. So again, can we create materials that are adaptable over time as worker education, worker needs change for food safety? And then have you seen this before? Hopefully, some of you have. So again, for me personally, this was my doctoral project. Identify an unsafe poultry practice for consumers, create educational materials, see how they're received out in the public. And, it was one of those things that during my research, no one really noticed the Don't Wash Your Chicken campaigns at the library. At Drexel, it wasn't until a press release that came out that Don't Wash Your Chicken became huge. My advisor, Dr. Quinlan, she got more grant money years later to create a 2.0 version with New Mexico State University, Learning Game Lab. So it was great for me to reconnect with their group and work on the produce trainer for our materials. So in the back of my mind, this was a grand slam, right? People heard about this nationally, internationally. It was all over the news back in 2013, and still people today are talking about, do you wash your chicken? I don't wash my chicken. Oh, here's this image. So how can we make a product now that's going to have this long-lasting impact? Right. This was my gold standard, and I wanted our next outreach and educational materials to live up to that comparison, so to speak. So with the help of Angela, she was able to really hone in on what farmers needed. When we built the team, right, I talked a lot about consumer food safety education. I'm a family and consumer sciences agent. My expertise is in consumer food safety education, where you see a lot of behavioral theory in place. Angela, she was our on the farm person, saw what was going on with different models of farming and talked to farmers all day long. We also had Nicole Cook from UMES. She works as part of the Ag Law Education Initiative. She loves reading policy. So when you're thinking about creating a worker training that's meeting FSMA needs, she was a great addition. Plus, her ability for grammar and wordsmithing was super helpful in this case. And then again, we had New Mexico State University's Learning Game Labs that has the expertise to create a lot of fun interactive materials, whether it's just print materials to more engaging games. And so what we were thinking about was creating our supervisor manual, our video on what risk assessment is, because we don't see a lot of videos out there related to farm risk assessment. We wanted to have 3 different lessons that all connected to one another and could be self-paced. We also wanted this to live on a website for people to access as they needed. So the brainstorming, again, we needed reference photos. We wanted something that New Mexico State University could use to create their illustrations. We did think about showing farming both in urban and rural settings. We just didn't quite get there. We did want to show produce that was going to be seasonal because, again, we wanted to be relevant to a lot of different growers based on our needs assessment. And then again, just briefly showing this is correct, this is incorrect, and why. We wanted to have our farmers represent what growers are in Maryland. We do have the nickname of Little America. We also knew that our materials needed to meet accessibility needs, and New Mexico was great in making sure our materials met those needs. And we'll reach on that a little later. Another thing that we did too with some of the interns I had was they helped make sure that our word choice and language and sentence structure was meeting basic health literacy principles. Other things that I wanted our project to have was to fit into the bigger picture of food safety education with what's been done and what's been successful. And we'll get to that a little bit later. We needed to incorporate adult learning theory. So again, making it dialogue based and interactive for adults to hopefully really flourish in these educational settings and keeping them short because there's farming to do and no one can take too much time. So on the left is just a screenshot of the products in our description during that brainstorming phase. This is the photo list and video list that Angela created. Couldn't have done this project without her. We really had a great team with unique expertise. So again, we hired or contracted someone to take photos and videos, and the level of detail that went into all of it was absolutely phenomenal. Again, here's our photo list, just showing screenshots of some of the photos that we were able to get in high tunnels with an actual farmer. So now New Mexico was able to start doing their thing. They were able to use those reference photos and create illustrations for it to mock up to see, is this the concept of the game that we want to go through? So again, on your left with all the exclamation points, that's our food safety I Spy game. So again, you would pick an icon and another little screen would pop up and you would have the prompt working while sick. You have symptoms of a foodborne illness, right? What should you do? That center photo with the person squatting down by a bush is the harvest decision day. You're ready to harvest. Am I going to do this or am I going to do that? And how that gets played out. On the right in color is just some examples of how we wanted our farmers to look for representation. And then on the bottom right, the 7 squares is our mock-up for what would become our SOP builder. So here on our website, New Mexico shares how it's meeting accessibility and their approach. So that was helpful for all of us. And again, we had that intern work to put our objectives and our overview through a language calculator. And our goal was to really make sure that the language was simple and clear and was at an appropriate reading level. So earlier, there was another USDA funded project that New Mexico State University worked on for Produce Safety Matters. It's, I think, about 6 different videos, and it's great illustrations and videos for talking about key issues around using a dunk tank, um, animal exclusion, and I wanted our videos to look like what was done 10 years before, so it looked like they were part of the same project. So on the left is the one that a different group did, and on the right is the beginning of what we were creating. Now, here again is a screenshot of our video for risk assessment on farms, and we're looking at the 3 hazards from biological, physical, and chemical. And again, you'll see some videos alluding to maybe one hazard to another, but not in this context. So this was new in the consumer, or rather the farming food safety world for training. So the next thing we'll go to is our supervisor manual. At the time, I think my daughter was 1 or 2 years old, and I would be reading books about counting. And Maryland actually has a very rich history with trains. I think my husband and I were watching a lot of Wes Anderson movies, and there's always a train in his shows. And so I was like, all right, we're creating the supervisor manual. We need to make the lessons short. We need to make them easy to find. We need to make them adaptable. So the way we did this was just like the Eric Carroll book, where every number gets a train car added. We made our lessons follow that motif. At this point in time, I ran out of money for New Mexico State to help create this. I was fortunate enough to have an undergrad student email me out of the blue saying they were in graphic designs and wanted to intern with me. And I was like, wonderful, I have a project for you. And so this was based off of her efforts. And so again, at the bottom, we have the produce trainer. If you're looking at the supervisor manual, you start with your intro. L1 is lesson one, lesson two, lesson three, your appendix. And if the farmer doesn't like what we have as short 5, 15, 30-minute lessons, that's great. They can create their own lesson plan to address some of the needs to make sure their worker training is specific enough for them. Maybe we're just that jump start, and that's great. Another detail I wanted to make sure was that we had produce that represented what was growing in Maryland in the train cars. Another concept that I wanted to work into our supervisor manual were some of those best practices from Smarter Lunchroom. So if you're not familiar with Smarter Lunchroom, also known as the Smarter Lunchroom movement, it's behavioral economics. So helping students at school cafeterias make the healthier choice. So for example, if they can choose a piece of fruit or a cookie for their sweet treat, you're going to put the cookie in the back and the fruit in the front. So the student has to ask the person at the lunch line, hey, I'd like the cookie. So the easier thing for them is to grab the fruit. Maybe the more difficult thing is to ask for it. So again, we had someone from our SNAP Ed program at the time come in and talk about smarter lunchrooms and how their perspective of creating cafeteria worker training could translate into something short, timely, effective for farm workers as well. I saw that one-to-one connection when I was helping with some of the smarter lunchroom pieces in Maryland. Another thing too for our manual was helping with public speaking skills. We thought maybe supervisors weren't as used to public speaking to their workers, so let's make some quick tips. So the image on the left is our sheet that is based off of some best practices from 4-H. So we had our graphic designer Trish Moore at the 4-H state office help with this piece. Another thing too, when we're thinking about farm food safety culture and how to build it, if you're talking about the weather every day at work, we're hoping you're also talking about food safety every day. And so Phil Tocco from Michigan State University's extension was like, put a ladder in. So we built that ladder and have a nice quick visual for some of the different levels applied to food safety culture. So here we're just showing you the lesson intro. Um, we worked with an industry partner to review some of the early pieces to see what we should modify, what needs to be added. So that was really helpful. So again, the resources you'll need, the ideal work size, the supplies, if you're providing it as an online training or in person, and some factors to consider. Other things that we wanted to provide were that short 5-minute huddle that you might have before your workers go out and do their activities, or maybe something longer on the 30-minute mark. And then anything else that you wanted to add as well. And you can see how easy at the bottom with the train that you could find that information. So the risk assessment video, I think at the time my husband was having us watch a lot of Mission Impossible movies, and you always hear in food safety conferences putting on the lens and seeing food safety risks. And so we started to draft out what that might look like as a visual and a dialogue. Um, so some of us might remember the videos from Schoolhouse Rock and how fun and how much you learned through a short illustrated video. And so that was the goal here. And I think we achieved it pretty well. Again, when we're looking at what was done in 2014 from another group, they had purple fruit. Purple fruit is nondescript. It and we wanted purple fruit in ours, and New Mexico just put some nice blobs on it for making it that second generation of purple fruit. So again, the idea is when you step onto the farm, you're hopefully changing your mindset and looking for different hazards, whether it's biological, physical, and chemical in your day-to-day operations. So Farm Food Safety I Spy. So here was a draft that New Mexico created for us. Does anything at this stage bring cause for concern or question? Um, I shared this image when I was talking about what Extension does with undergrads down at College Park, and no one picked up on it. So they drew a female that seemed to throw up, right? And I didn't want a female in that image and have a whole food safety worker training be about is she pregnant or not? So they wound up changing it to a male. So some of those details we tried to be sensitive to. What was the main goal? Food safety, not whether someone might be pregnant or not. So as we started fleshing out lesson 1 for the Farm Food Safety I Spy, again, we wanted to focus on the why. Everyone loves getting a question right. Whether you're right, whether you're wrong, we wanted to give a quick explanation of why that was right or why that was incorrect. For our second lesson in our visual SOP builders, this has been a fun one out in the field. So again, Angela started mocking up what the visuals were and the explainer, because again, we wanted that emphasis of why. And on the right, you see some images of how New Mexico was developing some of those cards and the correct answer at the end. So here we actually tried a mock-up. It was easy to see what the SOP builder was going to look like online. They were going to click through, but in person, I wasn't sure what that would look like. I think it was March Madness, and I was thinking basketball, and I was like, oh, people are going to watch basketball at a restaurant and there's coasters there. So if we could put our SOPs on coasters, those would be small, easy to transport, and we can have the image on one side and the correct order on the back. So we had a cleaning and sanitizing grower training coming up, and we were able to mock it up and test this in situ with actual farmers. And this was a lot of fun to have them work in small groups and figure out what the SOP would be for our farm. The last lesson is our risk assessment in action. So we came up with recirculated water and decisions during harvest. During the time of our funding, the pre-harvest water was still up for debate for what the final rule was going to be. And I decided that we weren't going to touch pre-harvest water because I didn't want our group to make a lot of materials only to have it not come through later on based on the final rule. But we did want to address recirculated water. And so here, why we chose doing this was, again, it was evidence-based from our needs assessment. So for the website, we have it producetrainer.org. Again, we're talking about produce food safety. Maryland has that rich train history, and it is a trainer, so it seemed like a clever name for our website. We also have it available in Spanish. Even though language was not a concern during our needs assessment, and we realized it was a small sample size, out talking about with farmers, we were getting questions, well, is it in Spanish? And so we were able to put some funds to getting everything available in Spanish. In terms of print materials, we do have our supervisor's manual in PDF form that you can print. We have bookmark templates as part of our marketing scheme. So it's just something nice and simple. We also have the PDFs for your poster, your animal coasters, and your harvest SOPs as well. So in terms of our audience testing, we were lucky that we had a lot of different touch points in 2024 with farmers in the spring because, again, for Maryland, we're able to do a lot of professional development for them during that period before they go into the heavy growing and harvesting season. So in mid-February, we just wanted to test what they thought about just looking at an example of the key takeaways and learning objectives. What we learned from that conversation and one a little bit later in February was why aren't we using photos? Illustrations look more for a kids audience, which was a great question. So in our manual, we actually address why we chose illustrations because it allows for less distraction for how detailed a photo can be. So again, we actually had one of our illustrators from New Mexico just write something short, why illustrations are great for learning, and put that right into our supervisor manual. So here, this was my daughter when she was 2. She loved playing the games to keeping the farm clean. She'll still ask to play this game. And during this time period, not our county, but some of the counties over in the Eastern Shore, like Queens Anne County and Cecil County, they'll have ag awareness events. And so the idea is that 7th graders from the public schools can come and learn about different areas of agriculture, whether it's aquaculture, drones, animal husbandry, right? We also have a food safety and nutrition kind of setup. And one of our rotations within our food safety station was playing some of these produce trainer games. And we saw that the 7th graders were really engaged in having fun with this online learning. Because when we think about farming for younger audiences, it's not going to be focused on food safety. We've also shared materials with teachers at public schools that are interested in starting a school garden and may not think about food safety. So this kind of gives them that early jump of thinking of how can we incorporate food safety as well as growing. So we'll play our video.
produce farms can contain hazards that cause harm when not controlled. Hazards, which are biological, physical, or chemical in nature, can contaminate produce or food contact surfaces. Risk assessment is a way to spot likely hazards on a farm or in a packing house and judge the impact of the hazard on the safety of fruits and vegetables. An important part of our job is to look out for these risky scenarios. Daily risk assessments are important so we can prevent contaminated food from entering the food supply and making people sick. When we see these scenarios, we need to communicate those risks to our supervisors, coworkers, and work together to manage those risks. Your eyes are the start for people to enjoy safe and high-quality produce.
And so again, we're really happy that we did get funding from USDA on this one. So with that, I'm happy to stop here and answer some questions that you might have. For the scale of production, we were looking at very small and small farms, but again, it could be applicable in instances with larger farms. So again, I alluded to having someone from a produce industry that's quite large, and they looked it over and they could see areas based on how they provide worker training up the East Coast as having areas where they could use some of the materials. So again, it's free. We've had a lot of good luck with farmers engaging in the products as well as youth, 4-Hers. And so, if you are interested in some of the print material, we still have some manuals and coasters left. We can always send some your way. People have really enjoyed the games. And if you need some of the bookmarks too, I can work with you to try to send some of those materials out as well.
Shauna, that's awesome. Thanks so much. I what a thorough project. And you offering so much. So I just want to say that I will be sending out all this information to everyone who registered, just in case you didn't capture it, and I can include your email, Shauna, and
Mhm.
the link to the website, anything. So if you want to follow up on any of those materials.
Great. Thank you.
All right, well, we have a few more minutes left. So if there's any lingering questions, or insights or anything that you want to share, um, please feel free to put it in chat or open up your mic. Okay, Doug said in chat that he's interested. Doug,
Yeah, and another thing too, oh boy, yeah, not the best with this, but one of the items that Phil Toko mentions, like you just need to get something that is going to be a little easier for farmers to see at farm meetings, right? So we do have an 8.5 or yeah, 8.5 by or 11 by 17 that you can print out. That's a standalone board to help advertise and get farmers to the materials too.
Hi, I'm Luisa Santamaria. I'm from Oregon State University. I have been working with education for work workforce in Spanish. So I developed a manual actually for workers, farm workers. So I would like to know what your material. So you focus more, and if I understood correctly in the beginning, you said the requirement is that you have to speak English, but then at the end you decide to do it in Spanish. So I would like to know how that will change because your audience will be completely different with the material that you develop. So I would like to know how, if you have some results from that.
Yeah, again, having all the materials translated into Spanish was basically feedback from folks at conferences and farmer meetings. So, we tried to meet the needs of what people were saying they wanted, and that was one of them. Um, you don't want me speaking any other languages. I'm very bad at it. But luckily, New Mexico State University, they're very familiar with translating materials, English, Spanish, other languages. So they were able to work with their professionals on the translation side to get those translated into Spanish on my behalf.
All right. Thank you.
Mhm.
There is a question from Terry in the chat. Have you considered adapting this for homeowners, Extension Master Garden volunteers?
No, I haven't. That's actually a great idea. There is actually an open RFP for the Food Safety Outreach Project. So this could be something that I'm more than happy to connect you with the folks at New Mexico if this is an area that you're really interested on.
Thank you for your presentation. Really nice work.
Thanks for
Great.
tuning in, everyone.
Thank you. I need to leave now. Bye.
Thanks. Bye bye. Okay, it looks like people are hopping off. So I'll go ahead and wrap this up. Shauna, thanks so much for giving us that presentation. It seems like just like looking at the chat and the survey results, that people are excited to dig in and learn more. So thanks so much.
Great. Thank you for having me again. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you as well. Bye bye.